I first heard about Krishna Consciousness, I think it was in 1967, when I was an undergraduate at Rutgers University in New Jersey, and I used to come to New York City quite often because I was interested in culture and things that were going on at that time in the city. And at that time I was interested in film, especially underground film. And there was one venue in New York. It was called the Filmmakers Cinematheque. It was in the winter of 1967. And I found out that even although that place had been used for screening films, the devotees had gone there for kirtan. And that's how I first found out about Krishna Consciousness. And it was also written in some of the alternative newspapers, and also in the New York Times at that time. And then after I graduated, that was the winter of '66. And then after I graduated from college in, I think it was April or May of 1967, I moved to New York City, moved out of my home. I was 22. In the US, it's quite common for students, once they graduate from, or at least in those days, once they graduate from university, to leave the home. In India, I know it's different. People stay close to their families. But in those days, I couldn't wait to get out of my suburban township and get into New York, where I thought all the action was. So I moved into the Lower East Side, and it was just a couple of blocks from the temple on 26 Second Avenue. And I had some friends who were friends of Allen Ginsberg, who was an American poet, famous beat poet, and he had befriended Srila Prabhupada and helped to propagate Krishna Consciousness when Prabhupada first opened up 26 Second Avenue. So one of his friends had a printing press in his basement, in his flat in New York. And in that printing press, they printed some copies of Back to Godhead. And the devotees used to work in his basement. And he told me about the Sunday love feasts on 26 Second Avenue. And that's how I started finding out about ISKCON. At that time, Prabhupada was not in New York. He had already gone back to India because he had some, I think, heart issues. And then at the end of that summer, I used to go to the Sunday Love Feast every Sunday. And then at the end of that summer, I went out of the country to Morocco for a few months. And then I came back again in December of '67. And at that time, Life magazine, which is a popular pictorial magazine, they declared that 1967 was the year of the Guru. And they had Prabhupada's photograph in the magazine, along with some other Indian gurus who were popular at that time. And in January of '68, I went to graduate school at Columbia University, at the School of Film, Radio, and Television, in the journalism school. And I went to study filmmaking. So that year was a lot of turmoil in the United States against the war in Vietnam, civil rights issues, and there were a lot of student protests. And my campus was closed down because of student protests. So I started going to the temple more regularly. And then I think it was April of '68, Prabhupada was returning to the East Coast. I'm not sure of the exact schedule where he was coming from. Was it from India or was it from the West Coast? I don't recall. And then I think he went to Boston. And then from Boston, No, came to New York, and then he went to Boston. Came to New York, yeah. Came to New York, and that's where I met him in the airport, JFK Airport. And for some reason, I felt very emotional when I first saw him. And then he went up to Boston, and then from there, he went up to Montreal. And the devotees asked me if I wanted to go to Boston to be with Prabhupada, and I said no, I wanted to stay in the New York temple just to see if I'd like to move in. And then they immediately asked me if I wanted to get initiated. I hadn't been going for more than a few weeks. And I said, no, I'd like to wait. But then a few weeks later, they said he was doing initiations in Montreal if I wanted to come. So I said I would. And at that time, they had quite cheap flights for students. So you could fly cheaply to Boston and Montreal. So I flew up to Montreal, and I got initiated. And yesterday, when I was looking at the memorabilia for Srila Swami, I noticed in the glass case there was a baseball cap, and it said Prabhupada's dog. So that reminds me of a comment that Prabhupada made at my initiation when Brahmananda Swami was putting on my neck beads. Prabhupada commented, he said, now you have an owner like a dog. He said, now you're Acharya's dog. At the time, I don't know if I was happy about that. But anyway, I came to realize what he meant later. So that reminds me when I saw that cap, Prabhupada's dog. And of course, the good thing about dogs is that dogs are loyal to their masters. At least a good dog should be loyal and devoted, regardless of anything else. So that's one good quality that devotees should have, is loyalty and devotion. And because and I was studying filmmaking, but I dropped out. But then the devotees told Prabhupada, or I may have told them myself, I can't remember, that I had been studying filmmaking, and Prabhupada said that I should make a film of the Bhagavad Gita. And he said he would direct it. So I never knew how that would come about, and eventually it never did, at least from my side. But he did say he wanted a film of the Bhagavad Gita. And I had also helped, because I had my degree is in English literature, so I had a background in writing and in English in general. And so I was encouraged to write for Back to Godhead. And then I remember I was just reviewing some of the letters that Prabhupada had written me about topics that I could write about Back to Godhead. One of the things I had suggested was writing about Ayurvedic medicine, which I thought would be an interesting topic. But Prabhupada said not to waste time on that, because I guess even though it does have a Vedic connection, he thought it was too mundane, rather than writing directly something about Krishna Consciousness. So because I had that that drama and film and writing background, he kind of encouraged me in those fields. And even though devotees were not supposed to read mundane literature or see movies, I would still continue because I felt I needed to be acquainted with film techniques. So there was another devotee in New York, his name was Damodar Das. He was also a filmmaker. I think that was his profession. And we started making some, like they call them home movies now, but before they had sound films, we made some silent films with devotees dressed up as Krishna and pastimes. And one time we had taken Prabhupada to the Brooklyn Botanic Gardens, which is a beautiful botanic gardens in New York. And Prabhupada really liked it there, and he said it was like a reflection of Vrindavan. He said that's why people like to go to gardens, because it's a reflection of the spiritual world. And so later we made a film with some devotees dressed up as Lord Chaitanya and Radha and Krishna in the Brooklyn Botanic Gardens. I think that film is still around someplace. I'm not sure what happened to it, but I think it's still around. And Prabhupada did instruct us about doing dramas and writing films. And he said that when the actors were dressed up as Radha and Krishna, they should be treated just like that also. And then later, I never did much with filmmaking, but I did start a drama group in New York City. It was called the Vaikuntha Players, and Prabhupada encouraged us very much in that. And we would do dramas for the devotees on the weekends, for the Sunday feast, and we also did street dramas. And I remember writing to Prabhupada once that I really wanted to do a drama on Broadway. Broadway is the theater district of New York City, and it's where professional theaters are produced, and they have big audiences. And he said, very soon all your dreams will come true and you'll be doing dramas on Broadway. But actually, when he said that, or when I was thinking on Broadway, I meant inside a theater. But it turned out that we actually did do dramas on Broadway on the street. We did street dramas. One of them was called The Wrong Bank Account, about somebody who puts all his money in the wrong account. In other words, in a material account instead of a spiritual account. And then when he goes to withdraw his money, the bank teller tells him that you put your money in the wrong bank account, and he dies of a heart attack. And we did other dramas too. One was called The Age of Kali. And then we also used to dramatize various pastimes from Krishna book. And sometimes we would have songs. I would write the songs also. And Prabhupada sat and enjoyed one of our dramas in Brooklyn, the Brooklyn Temple. I can't remember which one it was. But I did omit one section. After New York, I was sent to Philadelphia to help open up the temple in Philadelphia. And I was the first temple president there. I think that was in 1969. 1969, yeah. Prabhupada wanted dramas done in India as well, but somehow I never managed to fulfill that. He said that they didn't have to, that the dialogue didn't have to be spoken, but it could be spoken off stage on the side, like subtitles or something. I'm not sure. Anyway, I did do some drama. I later became a teacher in the Vrindavan Gurukul, and we did do dramas in the Vrindavan temple with the Gurukul. And one of the dramas we did do was the story of Prabhupada's arrival in the United States. Of course, that was after he had passed away. When I was in Philadelphia, when I was a temple president, the networks, I think they were required to have some religious broadcasting, a certain amount of religious broadcasting. So I convinced them to allow me to read Isopanishad on the air. So we did that in Philadelphia. It was broadcast on television, and Prabhupada was very happy about that. There's a lot of letters. When I was a temple president, we used to write him like once a month. The temple presidents were supposed to report to Prabhupada about their temples. So I used to write him once a month. And that was the way we communicated in those days. So I have a lot of letters. They're all on file. I turned them in for archives. So you can access them. Well, you asked me about something visual. I'll tell you something visual. When I used to see Srila Prabhupada on 26 Second Avenue, he had a small apartment, small flat upstairs behind the temple, and he had a low desk, much smaller than this, maybe kind of like that, but it was not as ornate and not as opulent. and on his desk he had a small globe. And I remember once, globe of the world, and I remember once going up to his room to talk with him, and he was kind of staring at the globe. And then he looked up and he said, if they knew my plans, they would lock me up. They would arrest me. So at that time we had the idea that, I mean, he already knew he wanted to spread Krishna consciousness around the world. But at that time there was only a few temples in New York and San Francisco, and I think in Boston. And the idea of Krishna consciousness being spread around the world seemed like a very far-fetched dream. And then we used to joke, somebody will go to Russia and somebody will go to Africa. But that summer that I joined, that's when the devotees came from San Francisco to New York to go to London. I guess that was summer of 68. Yeah, August 68, yeah. So at that time, that Prabhupada's vision was starting to materialize. But to us, it seemed like a very strange, hard to believe that it would take place. Of course, there's also an anecdote where, also from New York, where some stranger had spoken to Prabhupada, I think it was in Tompkins Square Park, about what he was doing, and Prabhupada mentioned that the temples were there, but they're only separated by time. I also happened to be in Vrindavan at the time when Prabhupada passed away. Actually, I had come to Mumbai at that time when Prabhupada was in Mumbai, and then he took the train to Delhi. Was it to Delhi or to Mathura? I can't remember now. And we were on the train with him, myself and some other devotees. I remember it was very hot. It must have been kind of at the end of the monsoon season. I think he had gone to London, but then he had come back here, and then he went to Vrindavan. And then I spent that last month or so in Vrindavan. Sometimes I would do a little service in the kitchen or something to help his servant. I remember I didn't feel comfortable in Vrindavan because it was too much of a culture shock for me. I'm more of an urban person, city boy. So I preferred being in Delhi. And I remember once I was in Delhi in the Bengali Market Temple, and my wife and I were there, and Prabhupada came and we hosted him. And I wasn't really comfortable in India. I couldn't really find a service that I felt comfortable doing. Prabhupada wanted me to do the dramas, and I remember sitting in the room though, and he said that we should open up a temple in Afghanistan. And I was kind of surprised when he mentioned that. And he said that Gandhari, Arjuna's mother, was from Gandhara. Gandhara was a former Buddhist kingdom at that time. I mean, it was known as Gandhara, but of course during the Pandavas it was still also known as Gandhara, and that's why she was called Gandhari. So I remember that. And the city in Afghanistan, Kandahar, comes from Gandhari. And he said we should open up a center. And then years later, I was teaching in Pakistan, and I met Afghan refugees from that area who were Hindu, and from the Taliban side they migrated to Pakistan. Anyway, my wife and I did spend some time here in Mumbai when Hare Krishna land was opened, before this temple was constructed, and she used to cook for him. So I do have some memories of that. and we stayed in one of these, in the old houses that were on the compound before, and then Prabhupada used to sit on the rooftop and have darshan. I saw one of the photos. Then I came back in the 80s with Boy George. I had cultivated him in New York, and I asked him if he wanted to come to India. So he said he wanted to come. I don't know why he didn't fly to Delhi, he flew to Mumbai. So we hosted him here, and then we introduced him to other people in the film world, in the Bollywood world. And he met Asha Bhosle, and she said she wanted to do a song with him. And then they on the second trip, they came back again, and he did that song, Bow Down Mister, which you'll see in that Prabhupada movie. So I took him to here. Narottam also helped to host us. And then we went to Vrindavan, and Boy George took a bath in Kusum Sarovara, and then he wrote the song Bow Down Mister, which I think is very popular, and it brought a lot of people to Krishna Consciousness. You know the song?
Yeah, the order from all the
Yeah.
all the Hindus.
Yeah. It's in that movie. It's very, very lively, and you can't stop clapping and singing. And yeah, for some reason he didn't stay here. He stayed at that time there was a Holiday Inn. Oh no, he stayed at the Centaur. I don't know if the Centaur's still here. He stayed at the Centaur Hotel. And then Boy George also, he was very attracted to Krishna, and there's one photograph where he's dressed up as Krishna. There's a French photographer team, I forget their name, Pierre and Gilles, and they photographed him dressed up as Lord Krishna. Thank you all for hosting me. You've all been very kind and generous and hospitable, and it's overwhelming.